There are places in Europe where history does not lie beneath your feet. It breathes behind the walls. Somewhere, in the ruins of an old chapel forgotten by maps and monks alike, there stands a wall so still, so unremarkable, that no one would ever guess what it hides. Its stones do not shift, its mortar does not crack. And yet, if you press your hand to it, really press in the silence between the bells, you might feel something faint. Not vibration, not sound, but presence. It is said the wall once held a woman, not a legend, not a ghost story, a daughter of flesh and blood, a nun sealed away by the church she served, not for blasphemy, nor witchcraft, nor rebellion, but for love. Her name does not live in the pages of saints or sinners. It clings instead to the dust between bricks, scratched in desperation, whittled into memory. Her name was Antonia Margherita Limera, Venice, 1711. And her story was nearly lost until the stone gave it back. There was a time when the church did not need fire to punish. It had stone, it had silence, it had immurement, from the Latin immurus, within the wall, not buried, not hanged, but placed inside, alive. This wasn't a punishment reserved for monsters. It was reserved for those who dared to want something more than obedience. And Antonia wanted love, not lust, not scandal, just the warmth of another soul beside her own. And for that, she was erased, not with violence, but with ritual, not by sword, but by silence. This is not folklore. This is not the imagination of some Gothic novelist. This happened. In the year 1704, Venice moved not just on water, but on secrets. Behind every mask at the carnival, behind every prayer whispered in stone cloisters, there were stories veiled in shame. The Santa Lucia Convent sat at the city's edge, uncelebrated, decaying slowly under sea salt and time. It had once been grand. Now, its iron gates were red with rust, its chapel cold, its sisters too few. And it was here, behind those gates, that 16-year-old Antonia Margherita Limera arrived with her soul and silence in tow. She came from a noble family in decline. The title remained, but the coin did not. There was no dowry to tempt a husband, no freedom to seek work or adventure. For girls like Antonia, the convent wasn't a refuge. It was exile wrapped in ceremony. She took her vows not out of calling, but necessity. She was told it was God's will. She believed, at least at first, in the early years. She tried to become the silence expected of her. She washed floors until her fingers bled. She fasted until dizziness became normal. She whispered confessions so minor they seemed absurd. I wanted to laugh. I stared too long at the moon. I thought of my childhood. At night, when all the others slept, she lay with open eyes and whispered psalms not out of guilt, but yearning. And then, a presence. He came with a visiting monastery, Brother Giacomo, a man of soft voice and sharp mind, monk who looked at her and didn't see a veil or a sin or a silence to be preserved. He saw Antonia. Their eyes met during a shared mass. They said nothing, but something ignited. It wasn't desire, not in the way that damns. It was breath. It was life. It was recognition. At first, a glance. Then, a word in passing. Then, a folded note hidden within a psalter. The words were not vulgar. They were sacred in their own way. "There's more of God in your voice than in 1,000 sermons," he once wrote. Their meetings were rare, stolen in the narrowest of cracks in the convent's routine. Once, they met beneath the chapel, in the cellar where sacramental wine gathered dust and incense no longer clung. There, beneath arches damp with time, they imagined a life not built of stone, but of sun, a small field, a table, a child. a name not whispered in sin, but spoken aloud. They did not run. They did not flee. They simply hoped. And in a world like theirs, hope was enough to condemn you. It was not thunder or accusation that began the end. It was a whisper. One sister heard too much, or saw something that should not have been seen, or perhaps she simply imagined it and let envy fill in the rest. It's unclear who betrayed them, a frightened novice, an aging nun, bitter with sacrifice. But one night in 1711, long after the chapel had been dimmed for prayer, Antonia's door opened without warning. She was dragged from her cell barefoot, her veil torn from her hair. She spoke not a word. No one explained. She was taken to a room almost no one had seen, a stone chamber beneath the convent, used only for matters the church did not want written down. Inside were 3 figures cloaked in black, the abbess and 2 priests sent from afar, silent men with rings that gleamed like law. They said 5 words. You have broken your vows. No advocate, no defense. Only a torn piece of Giacomo's robe, a letter, half burned, a mention in a confessional, and her presence in that cellar. I loved, she whispered, but I did not sin. But to the church, love was the sin. They had options: banishment, silence, even quiet reassignment to a stricter order. But this was not about punishment. It was about example. The abbess said it softly, as if bestowing a benediction. Vad in pacem. Go in peace. But behind the veil of mercy, those words bore a darker meaning. Among certain orders, it was code. A death sentence spoken like a prayer. Immurement. They would not spill her blood. They would seal her breath. A living sacrifice. A lesson in stone. At dawn, hammers echoed through the chapel. The sisters were told the altar required restoration. No one questioned it. But behind the scaffolding and veils, a wall was rising, not against the outer structure, but within. A cavity was carved beside the altar, 6 feet tall, barely wide enough for a person. It had no door, only an opening that would soon vanish. Inside, they placed a small oil lamp, a crucifix, a folded blanket, a strip of bread, a flask of water, and a shelf no larger than a kneeler. At dusk, Antonia was led in. She wore her habit. Her veil was newly straightened. Her feet were bare. Her wrists were loosely bound with linen, not to restrain her, but to honor ritual. She spoke no protest. Not since the tribunal. Some say she had been given something to numb her. Others claim she looked directly at the cross and smiled faintly. No chant, no liturgy, just 2 workers laying stone, and a priest mouthing final rites beneath his breath. A younger sister tried to hold her hand. The abbess pulled her away. Then the final stone was set. With a sound no louder than a soft breath, it clicked into place. The wall was smooth, the chapel quiet. She was alive behind it. No one recorded her cries, but some say they heard them after. Tapping, soft scratching, whispers too faint to carry meaning. Historians say a person can survive without food and water for 2 to 3 days in such conditions. Longer if they pray instead of panic, if they hope instead of scream. But the walls never forget, and neither did the sisters. They began to leave offerings, a withered flower, a sliver of bread, a rosary tucked beneath the altar cloth. Each offering placed quickly, furtively. None of them spoke her name aloud, but they knew. The chapel knew, and the stone wept in silence. Time did what time does. It moved on. Revolutions rose, kings died, empires collapsed, and the convent, like so many others, faded into dust. By the 19th century, Santa Lucia was abandoned. By the 20th, it was forgotten. By the 21st, it was nearly gone. just a decaying name on a preservationist's file. Then in 2017, a team arrived. They were there to restore what little remained of the chapel. Stabilize plaster, catalog relics. No one expected the wall. The section near the altar was oddly thick, too smooth, too quiet. When they breached it, air that hadn't moved in centuries rushed out, thin and dry as parchment. Inside, a skeleton, upright, knees slightly bent, hands still clutched around a crucifix. No casket, no violence, just stillness. Forensic analysis revealed the truth. Female, approximately 25 years old. No trauma, no illness. Death by dehydration. Conscious for up to 72 hours. Likely immured alive. And beside her, faint as breath, etched into brick with a fingernail. Amavit. She loved. Not a confession. Not an apology. A final act of defiance. A last truth pressed into the walls that took her. Since then, 14 more immured women have been discovered across Europe, Italy, Spain, France, Poland. Always within convents, always behind walls. No markers, no graves, only echoes. Some died for love, some for questioning too loudly, some for simply being inconvenient. They weren't executed. They were erased. The church called it mercy. The law called it penance. But the walls, they remember. Today, the cavity at Santa Lucia remains behind, glass. Visitors come and stare into the narrow space where a woman once waited for God to answer. A plaque rests beside it. It does not name her. It says only, she went in peace. But she loved in defiance. And sometimes, just sometimes, those who linger too long swear they feel something in the air. Not cold, not wind, but grief. The kind that clings to stone and scripture alike. And they remember her, not as a nun, not as a heretic, but as a woman who believed that love could not be a sin. She loved. And for that, she was buried alive.